chapter, a new era. Lift off for AJ.
Aguero! 4 added minutes, and Gerrard.
With sport, there are two sides to it, the thrilling and emotional part and the ugly side, which happens in every sport and we hate to see it, and that is injury. Injuries have always been a part of sport and will be forever. In the last decade, scientists have really started to notice the long-term effects that some sports can have on the human body. And in this documentary, I'll be exploring this further and asking professionals their experience with the current changes to make the games we love safer. I've interviewed the Director of Sport at Reading Bluecoat School, G. Wilson, to get his thoughts on the current dangers of rugby and his opinion on the current rules. As a sporting director of the secondary school, have you seen a massive change in the way parents react to their children playing rugby?
Not particularly. We haven't seen a huge change with regards to parents have always been a little bit apprehensive about their sons or daughters playing a contact sport. But it might be because of the pupils we have into school. We are a traditional rugby playing school, so they wouldn't necessarily be coming into the school thinking that they weren't going to be playing rugby. They know they're going to be playing rugby as they come to the school anyway. So no, we haven't really seen a big change.
Yeah. And as a sports teacher, do you ever worry about the potential risks that a student could have when playing rugby?
Yeah, obviously pupil welfare is something that's very important. And rugby being a collision or a contact sport, there is always that risk of injury. But if we're talking about concussion specifically or head injury specifically, I have no greater concern over a concussion than I do over a broken bone or a dislocation or any other specific injury.
Yeah. From a very young age you've played rugby and you've experienced and seen the massive change in rules and how much more stricter the RFU has become. What is your experience with the rule changes, and do you feel that it is a good choice to make the rules safer and stricter?
Safer is very important. Obviously, going back to that player welfare, a lot of the rules that are now being included or introduced, I should say, are about keeping the players safe, and I think that's really important. However, I don't feel that the current rules with regards to, a lot of talk is around concussion, the current rules with regard to tackle height, I don't think that has a huge impact on concussion. Most concussions from my experience come from actually poor technique of the tackler, so as long as we're coaching pupils and players to tackle properly, then those rule changes are, if you like, they don't have a big impact on concussions overall.
Yeah. And do you feel as though the stricter rules could hinder a child's performance and stop them from reaching their full potential?
Again, I don't think so. The rules have all been, the game hasn't changed all that much. They're trying to make it safer, so bringing down tackle height and that type of thing. But I don't believe, and actually, game is going back to being more of an evasive sport as opposed to a contact sport. Rugby has always been an evasion sport, not a contact sport. Although with bigger players and more physical contact, coaches have gone in the past down that route. However, with the likes of people like Darcy Graham, for example, in the playing for Scotland in the Six Nations, he carved up around the bigger lads, and he's 12 stone I think and 5'9". So. Yeah.
And recorded concussions have now doubled in the past 5 years. Do you think that the current head injury assessment is good enough to see whether a player is safe to come back on the pitch or not? Because some players, for example George North, playing for Wales, completed the assessment and passed, came back on the pitch, then a few minutes later fell unconscious.
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, the numbers that you can take with a bit of a pinch of salt, if you like, because up until about 5 years ago, had concussion assessments and even the reports of concussions were very few and far between. So those numbers, I think, they can be misleading. And I think that with brain scans and MRI scans and that type of thing, we are getting better, particularly within the rugby community, and the RFU leading the way with regards to concussion. I think we will we're still learning essentially, and yes, we don't want to see the likes of George North coming off and then being assessed or supposedly assessed, then going back on. Certainly in the community side of it, we are trying to do as much as possible. So at school we scat test our senior rugby squads, and that has resulted in a number of boys coming off, being assessed, 1 or 2 going back on, but for the majority of them they've stayed off, and as a result later on in the week they have been cleared and they've been able to play the following week. However, if they'd gone back on, the chances of a secondary contact syndrome would make the situation even worse.
Yeah. Do you think videos like top 6 biggest hits in the Six Nations could be encouraging players to tackle harder?
There's no problem with tackling harder as long as they're tackling safe. I mean, I think a big attraction to the sport is the contact element of it, but I will go back to good technique, and as long as it's good technique and it's within the laws of the game, there's nothing wrong with a hard tackle whatsoever.
And with the massive increase in recorded concussions, do you think that rugby is becoming too dangerous for players being stronger, bigger and faster?
Don't think so, no. I think again we're seeing now coaches moving back towards a slighter player, so a more athletic player, more agile player, as opposed to, yes, you're still going to have your Will Skeletons who's, I don't know, 6'6" and 120 kgs, but we are seeing more and more players, or hopefully we'll see more and more players who've got those evasive skills to try and keep the ball alive, and contact should be the last option as opposed to the first option. And I do think through coach educating and concussion protocols and that type of thing, we are seeing that come around again.
Yeah. And finally, do you feel that the benefits of the game outweigh the risk of serious damage to a person's body?
Yeah, unquestionably. The characteristics and the traits that that an individual will gain from playing rugby far outweigh the injuries. And in fact, I'm a big believer in that. The whole reason you get those characteristics and those traits is because of the risk that comes with of injury. You knowing that your teammate is willing to take collisions, bumps and bruises for you, and you're willing to do that for your teammate. That's the whole idea of rugby, and that's why you get such special friendships, and it's such a special environment and sport that we really need to look after.
Risk is a part of every sport, but rugby has one growing concern, and George North has become the public face for concussion. 4 years ago, in a game against England, he was knocked out again. Doctors advised him to take a 5-month break from rugby. We've interviewed current captain of the Henley College first team to talk about his experience with concussion and his thoughts on the dangers of rugby. Do you think that the RFU should change the rules to make the game safer?
No, I think it's got a good flow to the sport. I think if they did change the rules, then it would just slow the game down a lot.
Yeah, I agree. When you had your concussions, you used to wear a scrum cap. Do you feel as though it gave you a false sense of security?
I felt like I was invincible. I felt like I could hit anything, and then the technique of my tackling just went completely out the door. So yeah.
Yeah, you thought you'd be safe just because you had a scrum cap on.
Yeah, definitely.
Whenever you're going into a big tackle or running into the fence trying to break through, are you ever worried about getting concussed?
Before a game, there's an element of injury, you could get injured, especially because rugby's getting a lot physical, and players are getting bigger and stronger and faster. So I personally wouldn't think about concussions when I'm bursting through, but then if there's a big guy running at me, I'm thinking, geez. Yeah.
Do you think that more people should be talking about how more and more rugby players are suffering with dementia in their later lives?
Yeah, I definitely think they should raise awareness for life after rugby, and how the concussions affect you, especially with dementia. So I definitely think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And finally, do you think that RFU are not mentioning the danger that rugby has on the brain purposely and keeping it away so that people aren't worried?
I don't think they're hiding it as such, but I definitely think they're keeping a low profile of it. There's not much media coverage and talk about how it has a massive effect on the brain, especially when you finish rugby, with dementia and everything. But yeah, I do think they're they're keeping it hush-hush.
In recent years, there has been multiple news articles about sporting injuries within school children specifically. The increase in concussion has caused doctors to dive further into the possible effects it could have on children. We've set up an interview with ex-professional footballer Peter Scott, current head coach at the Buckinghamshire College, and Tom Hogan, an FA qualified coach and current coach at the Buckinghamshire College, to get their opinions on the current controversy about how repeated heading of the ball could have possibilities to cause dementia.
So, Pete, over the past few years there has been multiple news articles about how heading the ball may have links with dementia. What is your opinion on this?
I think it's a really difficult one. Until there's actually clinical evidence that that's exactly what happens and that's the reasons for it. So I think it's very difficult for someone like myself. I just think that dementia comes on different forms. People who've never played sport before. So is it something that person would have got anyway, whether they played football or not? And they're the questions that I think we need to be answering and looking at in terms of whether dementia is brought on by people heading footballs over a course of X amount of years.
And in the National League in America, they've banned heading for under 11s. Do you think this should happen in England?
Oh, I personally think you should get kids used to heading the ball. I don't really see it as a big issue. The ball is designed for heading at that age. I don't see any reason why they should stop it. I think we get used to heading the ball. As long as we don't overpump the ball and make it difficult for them, I don't see any problem with it really.
Yeah. Pete, as a young player, were you ever warned about heading the ball too much, or was it always head the ball as much?
Well, I mean, obviously, very different times when I started playing football as a young person. I'm going back quite a few years now, so at that time it was never ever an issue with us as young players. In fact, like Tom said there, we were encouraged to head the ball from a really young age. So in terms of that, how things have progressed, and I know that's important, and people are thinking about health and safety and looking after people's well-being. So I understand that and I get that, but until it's actually, for me, it's an actual fact that this is an effect, then I don't think we should stop young people heading the ball, because as long as whatever age you are, you're playing with the right size ball, I don't think it's going to make a massive difference in terms of those factors.
Yeah. And on the other hand, football as a game and how it is played has changed massively, and the ball is not used as much as it once was from heading. So do you feel the heading ban would be needed?
No, I don't. The game's changed. We don't head the ball as often as we did. Definitely the equipment's better now for heading the ball. The balls are lighter than in our days as such. But the way we play the game now, we don't cross the ball probably quite as, well, we cross the ball the same, but not at the same height. We're more going towards people's feet now, and around knees and things like that. So if you have a look at the game now, there are a lot less headers than ever there were.
Yeah, in terms of that as well, I know that professional clubs now, it's really stringent tests in terms of head injuries, and I know for a fact that if anyone has a head injury, especially at younger age levels, or a clash of head or something in that way has happened, now they have to have a scat test, and they're not allowed to play again until they pass that scat test. So it's quite stringent now in terms of young people and when they can and can't play after a head injury.
As both of you are coaches, do you ever talk to your players about the links of heading the ball and the risk of dementia there is? Or, as there isn't a lot of evidence, do you just tell them to head the ball as much as they can?
We actually we teach them to head the ball, and we try and show them the proper way of heading the ball. Sometimes if people don't do it properly, with bad technique, that can cause you a bit of a problem, but we tend to still teach it because it's part of the game that we still play.
I think it'd be very difficult now in terms of where football is in 2019 to suddenly say to people, okay, we're banning heading from the game. It would completely change football forever, and I don't think that's realistic. So I would say, as coaches at the moment, I don't think you can bring a fear factor into people's minds. You know, you might say to a young player, if we talk to young players now about this might cause you dementia in 50 years' time, maybe it might create a fear about heading the ball anyway, because some people don't enjoy it and aren't comfortable with it anyway. So it's difficult, isn't it?
And to be honest, if I was a young player and someone said to me in 50 years' time you might start getting headaches or things like that, I wouldn't worry about that. I mean, it's not until you get older you start to realise what the sort of things that people said to you. So I think that's quite important as well, the understanding of it. But as we said, there's nothing to really support it.
We are at the Hawthorn Stadium, home to West Brom. Next to me is a special tribute to Jeff Astley, an ex-English professional footballer who played the majority of his career as a centre-forward for West Brom. Nicknamed the King by the club's fans, he played 361 games and scored 174 goals, also winning 5 caps for England. He sadly passed away at the age of 59 from dementia, supposedly brought on by repeatedly heading the ball. It was often said that heading a wet leather ball was like heading a bag of bricks. Scientists have said the repeated contact with the heavy ball used in the 60s caused trauma similar to boxers. During his time at West Bromwich Albion, his heading ability proved decisive as he scored 174 goals in 359 games. In the 68 season, he scored in every round of the FA Cup, including the only goal of the final. He won 5 caps for England and was part of the 1970 World Cup squad, retiring in '77.